You're watching Northern Crimes.
June 28th, 1959, Stettler, Alberta. You're a police officer making what should be a routine welfare check. The Cook family hasn't been seen in days, and neighbors are starting to worry. Their house sits quiet on the edge of town, curtains drawn against the summer heat. You knock on the front door. No answer. The station wagon is missing from the driveway. That's not unusual. Maybe they went visiting relatives. Maybe they took a trip. You walk around the property, checking windows, looking for signs of life. Everything appears normal. Too normal. Kind of stillness that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. You notice the garage door is slightly ajar, and there's something dark staining the concrete floor just inside. You push the door open, wider. The smell hits you first, metallic and wrong. Then you see the bloodstains, lots of them. Your flashlight beam cuts through the shadows, revealing drag marks leading toward the back of the garage, toward the grease pit, where mechanics used to work on cars. You approach slowly, dreading what you might find. The wooden cover has been hastily replaced, but it's sitting crooked. Your hands shake as you lift it. 7 bodies, a father, a stepmother, and 5 children, all in their night clothes, all stacked like cordwood in the darkness below. In this episode, we explore the Alberta Murders, cases that shattered the prairie's peaceful facade and revealed that in Canada's vast wilderness, evil can hide in plain sight, and sometimes the most horrific events happen in the places that feel safest. This is Northern Crimes. On June 28, 1959, the small prairie town of Stettler, Alberta, was rocked by the discovery of a crime so terrifying it left an enduring scar on the province's collective memory. The entire Cook family, Father Raymond, stepmother Daisy, and 5 children, all aged 3 to 9, was found murdered and hidden in a grease pit beneath their garage. The adults had been shot, the children bludgeoned to death. All were killed in their night clothes, suggesting the attack came as they slept. The massacre stunned not only Stettler but the entire nation. Suspicion quickly fell on 21-year-old Robert Raymond Cook, the eldest son of Raymond and his first wife, who died a decade earlier. What followed was one of the most debated criminal cases in Canadian history, marked by troubling evidence, a dramatic escape, and a controversial execution that made Robert Cook the last man ever hanged in Alberta. Robert's descent began early. Born in 1937, he had his first run-in with the law at age 10 and was in and out of institutions throughout his youth. His mother died when he was 9. By 12, his father had remarried, this time to Daisy Mae Gasper, Robert's former elementary school teacher. The family moved from Hannah to Stettler, but Robert's problems only deepened. Between his first incarceration at 14 and his death at 23, Robert spent less than a year total outside prison. Released in early 1959, he returned to Stettler, claiming he wanted to reconnect with his family, but his behavior was erratic. Months earlier, while serving time for breaking and entering, he'd been struck in the head with a lead pipe, a blow that reportedly made him more volatile and quick-tempered. In late June, he was arrested in Edmonton after trying to trade in the family station wagon using his father's ID. Police found children's clothing, family documents, and household items in the vehicle. When questioned, Robert gave shifting explanations about his family's whereabouts, raising immediate suspicion. Alarmed, police visited the Cook residence in Stettler. There, they found bloodstains and signs of violence. A deeper search led to a horrifying discovery: the bodies of all 7 family members, stacked beneath the garage in the grease pit. Robert was taken into custody and charged, but curiously, only for the murder of his father. Prosecutors likely hoped a single conviction would secure the death penalty without the complication of trying all 7 counts. Before the trial, he was sent to Ponoka Mental Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. But just days after his arrival, on July 11, 1959, he escaped. His flight sparked one of the largest manhunts in Alberta's history. Police, military, and civilians scoured the countryside. He was eventually found hiding in a pigsty near Bashaw, 60 kilometers from Stettler, and returned to custody under heavy guard. The first trial began in Red Deer in December 1959. The Crown's case rested on circumstantial evidence, Robert's inconsistent statements, his use of his father's identity, and the items found in the station wagon. But there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon. Still, the jury found him guilty. He won a retrial on appeal. The second trial, held in Edmonton in 1960, produced the same result. Despite raising doubts about the timeline and lack of physical proof, the defense couldn't sway the jury. Appeals to higher courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, were all denied. To this day, Robert's guilt remains debated. Supporters of the verdict point to his evasive behavior and possession of family belongings. Others argue the case relied too heavily on inference. There was no direct link, no confession, no forensic evidence, no smoking gun. Robert maintained his innocence to the end. In a poem written on death row, he wrote, "I sit here in my death cell, I know not why, for the evidence proved me innocent, and that is no lie." Some also questioned his mental state. The documented head trauma from the prior year may have impacted his behavior, an issue poorly understood at the time and largely ignored in court. In November 1960, Robert Raymond Cook was hanged at Fort Saskatchewan Provincial Jail. His was the last execution in Alberta. The Cook family murders remain among the most haunting in the annals of Canadian crime. More than 60 years later, the debate over Robert Cook's guilt still lingers, a shadow over a prairie town that never fully healed. On March 3, 2005, a routine property seizure in rural Alberta turned into the deadliest day for Canadian law enforcement in modern history. What began as a simple attempt to repossess a truck escalated into a calculated ambush that left 4 young RCMP officers dead and raised disturbing questions about policing in remote areas, officer safety, and the lingering danger posed by violent offenders. The tragedy unfolded on the farm of James Roscoe, a 46-year-old with a long and disturbing criminal history that included sexual offenses, weapons violations, and threats against police. His property, located 11 kilometers north of Rochfort Bridge near Mayerthorpe, Alberta, had become a fortress of paranoia. Though under a firearms ban, neighbors and police both knew he was heavily armed and dangerously unhinged. On March 2nd, 2 civil bailiffs arrived at the farm to repossess a truck Roscoe had purchased but never paid for. When they encountered his aggressive Rottweilers and hostile behavior, they wisely called for RCMP backup. By the time officers arrived, Roscoe had fled. What they found on the property would change everything. Inside a large Quonset hut, officers uncovered a sophisticated marijuana grow-op and numerous stolen vehicles in various stages of being stripped for parts. The scene suggested organized criminal activity, and a search warrant was quickly requested. In the meantime, 2 constables, Anthony Gordon from Whitecourt and Leo Johnston from Mayerthorpe, were left to guard the scene overnight. What officers didn't know was that Roscoe hadn't fled in panic. This was a man who'd spent years preparing for war with police. He owned radio scanners tuned to RCMP frequencies, kept intelligence files on local officers, including their names and vehicle numbers, and had weapons stashed throughout the property. After abandoning his truck at his aunt's house nearly 40 kilometers away, Roscoe sought help from a local acquaintance, Sean Hennessy, and Hennessy's brother-in-law, Dennis Cheeseman. Despite expressing reluctance, the two eventually agreed to drive Roscoe back towards the farm. During the ride, Roscoe ranted about getting revenge on the Mounties, describing what Hennessy would later call devil talk. Between 1 and 3 a.m., the men dropped Roscoe off near the property. He wore socks over his boots to muffle his footsteps in the snow and carried a Winchester rifle provided by Hennessy. He crept back onto the farm in darkness, determined to ambush the officers guarding the scene. The next morning, 2 more constables arrived, Brock Myrle and Pete Sheeman, along with 2 members of the RCMP's auto theft unit. At approximately 10 a.m., the 4 Mounties entered the Quonset hut to continue the investigation. Inside, hidden behind equipment and camouflaged by a sheet, Roscoe waited. As the officers worked, he opened fire with a Heckler & Koch semi-automatic rifle, killing all 4 almost instantly. Only Constable Johnston managed to return a single shot before falling. Outside, the 2 auto theft investigators heard the gunfire and spotted Roscoe emerge from the building, eerily calm and armed. He fired at Constable Vigor, wounding him. Vigor returned fire, striking Roscoe in the hand and thigh. Bleeding, Roscoe retreated into the Quonset and ended his life with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest. The loss was devastating. All 4 Mounties were young and just beginning their careers. Constable Anthony Gordon, 28, had been with the RCMP since 2002. Constable Leo Johnston, 32, had married just months earlier. Constable Brock Myrle, 29, had graduated from the RCMP Academy less than 3 weeks before the shooting, and Constable Peter Sheeman, 25, had served in Mayerthorpe since 2000. The subsequent investigation uncovered how Hennessy and Cheeseman had helped Roscoe return to the farm and provided him with a weapon. Both were initially charged with first-degree murder as parties to the offense. In 2009, they pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Hennessy received 10 years in prison, Cheeseman 7. The Mayerthorpe tragedy sent shockwaves through Canada. Critics called attention to the RCMP's outdated equipment and questioned why officers guarding such a volatile scene were left so vulnerable. The incident led to reforms in police procedures, including improved tactical training, upgraded body armor, and expanded access to more powerful firearms. Memorials in Mayerthorpe and Whitecourt now honor the fallen. Known collectively as the Fallen Four, their names have become a solemn symbol of the danger that police face, especially in remote parts of Canada, where backup is scarce and violence can come without warning. On April 12, 2011, Mark Twitchell was convicted of first-degree murder in an Edmonton courtroom, ending one of Canada's most disturbing and surreal criminal cases. Dubbed the Dexter Killer by international media, Twitchell was a 31-year-old aspiring filmmaker whose fascination with a fictional vigilante serial killer led him to commit a very real and brutal murder. Twitchell seemed like an unlikely suspect. Born on July 4, 1979, he was a married father living in Edmonton with dreams of making it big in the film industry. In 2007, he directed a Star Wars fan film titled Secrets of the Rebellion, which featured a cameo by Jeremy Bulloch, the actor who played Boba Fett in the original trilogy. To friends and collaborators, he was creative, charismatic, and driven, just another indie director chasing a dream. But beneath that polished image was a far darker obsession. Twitchell idolized the character Dexter Morgan from the Showtime series Dexter, a forensic blood analyst who moonlights as a methodical vigilante killer. Twitchell created a Facebook profile under Dexter's name and frequently posted about how much he related to the character. In one chilling post, he wrote, "I have way too much in common with Dexter Morgan." In September 2008, Twitchell rented a garage in South Edmonton under the pretense of filming a horror short titled House of Cards. The plot? A man lures strangers through online dating sites and murders them in a hidden garage. Unbeknownst to his cast and crew, Twitchell was using the film set to build a real-life kill room. His first victim was Guy Tetreault, a 33-year-old who'd responded to a fake dating profile under the name Sheena on the Plenty of Fish website. On October 3, 2008, Tetreault arrived at the garage expecting a date. Instead, he was ambushed by a man in a hockey mask wielding what appeared to be a gun. After a violent struggle, Tetro managed to escape. Embarrassed and confused, he chose not to report the incident. Twitchell wouldn't make the same mistake again. 1 week later, on October 10, 2008, 38-year-old Johnny Altinger answered the same fake dating profile. Like Tetro, he was lured to the garage, only this time the attack was successful. Altinger was killed shortly after entering, never to be seen alive again. When Altinger didn't return home or show up for work, friends grew concerned. He'd emailed them directions to his date, and when police followed the trail, it led directly to Twitchell's rented garage. Twitchell initially claimed the blood found on site was part of his movie set, but police weren't convinced. The investigation broke open with a discovery on Twitchell's laptop, a deleted document titled SK Confessions, with SK believed to stand for serial killer. The file read like a diary of murder. It detailed how the author created a kill room, lured a victim under false pretenses, murdered him, and attempted to dispose of the body. It even referenced the failed attack on Tetro. Twitchell insisted the document was fiction, just a screenplay, he claimed, inspired by his film project. But the parallels between the document, the Dexter series, and the real murder were undeniable. The plastic-wrapped room, the meticulous planning. Investigators even discovered that Twitchell had broken into Altinger's apartment after the murder to send messages claiming he'd gone to Costa Rica with a new girlfriend. He then attempted to incinerate the body, but ultimately dismembered it and dumped the remains in a sewer near his parents' home. At trial, Twitchell took the stand and claimed the killing was in self-defense, that Altinger had become enraged after discovering the date was a prank and attacked him. The jury rejected the story outright. After just 5 hours of deliberation, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. The case captivated the public and ignited a media frenzy. Headlines fixated on Twitchell's love of Dexter, raising questions about whether violent media can influence behavior or simply attract those already predisposed to act out fantasy. Many found the case uniquely disturbing because it blurred the line between script and confession, entertainment and real-life horror. Over the next several years, he exchanged hundreds of letters with journalist Steve Lillibuen, continuing to distance himself from the Dexter persona, even as he included drawings of actor Michael C. Hall, who portrayed the character. Most chillingly, Twitchell was reportedly allowed to finish watching the Dexter series while in prison. In 2017, he was even permitted to join an inmate dating website, sparking outrage given how he'd used online dating platforms to hunt his victims. To this day, Mark Twitchell remains one of Canada's most notorious killers. His story is a chilling reminder of how obsession, when left unchecked, can spiral into violence, and how easily fantasy can become a blueprint for murder. On December 15, 2011, at approximately 3:30 a.m., gunshots shattered the quiet along Highway 2 near Claresholm, Alberta. Minutes later, 4 young people were dead in what became one of Canada's most shocking murder-suicides, a violent ambush fueled by jealousy, control, and the refusal to let go. It began the evening before at a pub in Lethbridge, where friends gathered to celebrate Tanner Craswell's 22nd birthday. Tanner, a rising star with the Lethbridge Bulls baseball team, was from Prince Edward Island and had recently been named Rookie of the Year in the Western Major Baseball League. With him that night were his girlfriend, Shayna Conway, also 21 and from PEI, and his best friend and teammate, Mitch McLean, 20. Rounding out the group was Tabitha Steppel, a local woman and friend of Shayna's. But what started as a celebration quickly took a dark turn. Tabitha's ex-boyfriend, 21-year-old Derek Jensen, unexpectedly showed up at the bar. A paramedic trainee in Edmonton, Jensen had struggled to accept the end of his relationship with Tabitha, which had ended weeks earlier around Halloween. That night, his bitterness spilled into violence. Witnesses saw him confront Tabitha and shove her out of her chair in a disturbing display of possessive rage. After a heated exchange, Jensen left the bar, but his presence lingered. Throughout the evening, Jensen continued to call and harass Tabitha, In one phone conversation, he issued a chilling threat.
"This night's not going to end well for you. I hope you know that."
Meanwhile, Tanner and Mitch had early morning flights out of Calgary to spend Christmas with their families in PEI. Tabitha offered to drive them to the airport in her Ford Escape, with Shayna riding along. Around midnight, the four friends left Lethbridge and headed north on Highway 2, unaware that Jensen was following them. He wasn't just stalking them, he was hunting. Armed with a 9mm handgun, a Winchester rifle, and a loaded 12-gauge shotgun, all legally registered, Jensen was carrying enough firepower to wage war. He'd loaded his green Pontiac Sunfire with weapons and rage, and he was closing in. Around 3 a.m., the group stopped at a 7-Eleven in Claresholm for snacks. Surveillance footage later showed them laughing and relaxed, completely unaware they were being watched. Moments later, they were back on the highway, headed for Calgary. Jensen followed closely. Roughly 30 minutes later, near Claresholm, he rammed their SUV from behind, forcing them to stop on the shoulder of the highway. Shayna Conway, who was driving, stepped out to confront the driver, only to come face-to-face with Jensen and the barrel of a handgun. What followed was execution-style violence. Jensen shot Shayna 3 times, then opened fire on the vehicle, killing Tabitha and Tanner Craswell inside. Mitch McLean managed to flee the SUV, but Jensen shot him down as well. Mitch was found alive in a roadside ditch, but died shortly after being airlifted to Foothills Medical Center in Calgary. With the massacre complete, Jensen turned the gun on himself and ended his life with a single shot. Police arriving at the scene found 3 bodies at the roadside and 1 critically wounded survivor. Shayna Conway, despite being shot 3 times, had managed to crawl to a phone and call 911. She would become the sole survivor and only eyewitness to what happened that night. The investigation revealed how meticulously Jensen had planned the ambush. The fact that he was armed with 3 different weapons and followed the group for hours left little doubt. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage, it was a calculated execution. The tragedy devastated communities around Alberta and Prince Edward Island. Tanner and Mitch were more than promising athletes. They were beloved sons, teammates, and friends with futures that seemed limitless. Instead of celebrating Christmas with their families, their loved ones received news no one is ever prepared for. Shayna Conway would go on to recover physically, but the emotional toll remains unimaginable. She lost her friends and her sense of safety in a single moment, and carries the burden of being the one left behind to remember it all. The Claresholm highway murders remain a haunting example of how obsession, when left unchecked, can turn lethal. In the middle of Alberta's vast landscape, 4 young lives were stolen by a man who couldn't accept the word no. These 4 cases, spanning more than 50 years, reveal how violence in Alberta has often arrived without warning. In towns that seem safe, among people who once seemed trustworthy. They expose the fragile boundaries between order and chaos, justice and doubt. Some crimes triggered national debates, others left only silence in their wakes. All of them left behind questions that still echo across the province. In a place where distance can delay help and isolation can mask intent, Alberta's vastness has at times worked in a killer's favor. Because here, in one of the most open landscapes in North America, the darkest stories don't always stay buried. Some are still out there, waiting to be uncovered. On a cold January evening in 1970, a 17-year-old girl walked alone across a hospital parking lot in Olympia, Washington. The yellow interior light of her station wagon flickered on, and moments later, Patricia Garrison collapsed beside it, bleeding from nearly 20 stab wounds. A hospital employee found her barely conscious. Before slipping into shock, Patricia uttered a few cryptic words. She suggested she wasn't supposed to say who had driven her there. She held on for 32 hours before succumbing to her injuries. Her lungs had been punctured. One wound pierced her skull. On the front seat of her car lay a bloodied knife, believed to be the murder weapon, surrounded by smears that told only part of the story. This brutal attack stunned Olympia. But it wasn't an isolated event. Over the next few years, the quiet capital and surrounding Thurston County would become the backdrop for a series of killings and disappearances that shook the community and left investigators chasing shadows. This is Northern Crimes. Four years after Patricia Garrison's murder, another young life disappeared, this time without a sound. On May 25th, 1974, 14-year-old Brenda Joy Baker vanished while hitchhiking near Puyallup, Washington. It was a warm spring day, and Brenda had told friends she planned to meet a soldier stationed at Fort Lewis. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was common among teens, seen more as a rite of passage than a risk. Brenda was one of 7 children and had a history of running away, but this time felt different. She hadn't packed a bag or taken any money. When she didn't come home for the evening, her parents grew alarmed. They filed a missing person report before the day was over. For weeks, the silence deepened. Then, on June 17, 1974, 3 hikers wandering the edge of Miller Sylvania State Park stumbled across something terrible. Near a clearing, partially hidden beneath 2 logs and a scattering of brush, lay the decomposing remains of a young girl. The scene was bleak. From the waist up, the body had nearly disintegrated. Time, heat, and the elements had erased her features. Only through dental records could authorities confirm it was Brenda. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead for nearly a month, likely killed not long after she disappeared. The cause was listed as probable strangulation or knife wounds, but the advanced decomposition left little certainty. Her death, it turned out, wasn't the only one. Just months earlier, in November 1973, 14-year-old Catherine Devine had also vanished while hitchhiking, this time near Olympia. Her body was discovered in Capitol State Forest 11 days later. Her throat had been slashed, her clothing torn open, the remote woods a silent witness to another act of violence. 2 teenage girls, both hitchhiking alone, both found dead in wooded areas of Thurston County, both left behind barely a trace of their final hours. The similarities were chilling, and for investigators, it was no longer possible to view these cases in isolation. As detectives worked to piece together what had happened to Catherine Devine and Brenda Baker, unsettling connections began to surface. Both girls were young, just 14. Both were last seen hitchhiking near Olympia, and both were found murdered in remote forested areas of Thurston County, left exposed to the elements and the passing of time. The parallels were striking, and then came something far stranger. An anonymous caller phoned the Thurston County Sheriff's Department in the months following the murders. He claimed that in late November 1973, around the time Catherine Devine went missing, he'd been grouse hunting deep in the woods when he stumbled upon a shack. Inside, he saw a man with 2 girls, both around 12 to 14 years old. The caller said he sensed something was wrong, but left without intervening. When he later returned to the area in January, the shack had been abandoned. What remained, however, was grim. The carcasses of 6 dogs and 1 cat, skinned and stripped of their bones, littered the surrounding area. The bizarre scene raised questions about what had really taken place there. In early June 1974, the man claimed to have returned again and saw the same man near the shack. This time, when he returned with a friend on June 20, they were allegedly shot at. The timeline echoed the disappearances of Catherine and Brenda. While authorities couldn't verify all the details, the reports painted a disturbing picture: a remote hideout, repeated sightings, and potential threats to others who got too close. Additional witness reports added weight to the growing fear. A Seattle man named Bill Sullivan told investigators he'd seen a girl matching Brenda Baker's description hitchhiking near the Scott Lake interchange on I-5 in May 1974. He recalled her getting into an older, light-colored panel truck driven by a bearded man. The detail was chilling and specific. Despite these leads, investigators hit a familiar wall. Without hard evidence, no names, no vehicle plates, no physical proof, they couldn't identify a suspect. But the pattern was there. 2 girls gone, 2 bodies in the woods, eyewitnesses pointing to a danger lurking just beneath the surface. And it wasn't over. As the investigations into Catherine Devine and Brenda Baker's murders dragged on, another name began to cast a long and chilling shadow across the Pacific Northwest: Ted Bundy. By the mid-1970s, Bundy had become one of North America's most feared serial killers. His trail of terror stretched along multiple states, including Washington, where he admitted to killing at least 11 women. His victims were often young, white women with long brown hair parted down the middle, and his method was disturbingly calculated, luring them in with charm or fake injuries before attacking. The timeline of Bundy's known crimes overlapped with the murders in Thurston County. In May 1974, the month Brenda Baker vanished, Bundy was living in Seattle at the Rogers rooming house and working for the Department of Emergency Services in Olympia. That put him less than 2 hours away from both the place Brenda was last seen and the wooded park where her body was found. And the similarities didn't end there. Brenda and Catherine matched Bundy's victim profile: hitchhiking alone, found in forested areas, and killed within his active timeline. The pieces seemed to fit. For years, many believed Bundy was the prime suspect. Even Bill Devine, Catherine's father, came to believe it.
I needed to think it was somebody I could blame.
But behind the circumstantial similarities, doubts remained. Bundy had never confessed to either murder, and while he later claimed to have committed crimes too brutal to admit, no forensic evidence ever tied him to Brenda or Catherine. In the absence of clear answers, the myth of Bundy loomed large. His name became a convenient placeholder, a dark figure to attach to the unknown. But in time, the truth would take a much different shape. In 2001, with forensic DNA analysis now advanced enough to re-examine old evidence, investigators sent samples from the Catherine Devine case to the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory. The results were immediate and shocking. The DNA didn't match Ted Bundy. Instead, it pointed to William Cosden Jr., a man that had been in the case file from the very beginning. Cosden wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. In fact, he'd been an early suspect back in 1973. He worked at the Restover truck stop, a family business near where Catherine was last seen. Witnesses had reported seeing blood on his clothing and in his truck on the night Catherine disappeared. And just hours later, that same truck mysteriously caught fire and burned. Yet with no hard evidence, investigators couldn't make the case. The blood and hair samples collected in 1973 were inconclusive. Without a confession or stronger physical evidence, the case stalled. In 1986, deputies returned and collected updated samples of Cosden's blood, hair, and saliva. But it wasn't until 15 years later, using modern DNA technology, that those samples finally connected him to the crime scene. When confronted, Cosden initially denied knowing Catherine Devine. Later, he admitted to having sex with her, but insisted he hadn't killed her. On March 7, 2002, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office announced that DNA evidence had ruled out Ted Bundy and identified William Cosden Jr. as the man responsible for Catherine Devine's murder. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, nearly 30 years after the crime. For investigators, it was the moment they'd waited decades to see. For the Devine family, it was the beginning of long-delayed justice. On July 29, 2002, nearly 29 years after Catherine Devine's murder, a jury in Thurston County Superior Court delivered its verdict: guilty. William Cosden Jr. was convicted of first-degree murder. Judge Daniel Bershauer sentenced him to life in prison, calling him a danger to society who should never be released. For the Devine family, the moment brought both grief and relief. Nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions had finally led to justice.
For us, it's been 28 years of thoughts and thoughts and thoughts. It's finished. There's a justice system, and it works.
But while Catherine's killer was finally behind bars, the case of Brenda Joy Baker remained unresolved, and the similarities between the two murders raised an uncomfortable question: was Cosden responsible for both? Cosden's conviction offered long-awaited answers, but it also raised new and troubling questions. The similarities between Devine's case and that of Brenda Baker were hard to ignore. Both victims, teenage girls, both had last been seen hitchhiking alone, both were found dead in wooded areas of Thurston County, and both had connections to the Restover truck stop where Cosden had worked. It seemed more than a coincidence. Some investigators believe that Cosden, not Bundy, was responsible for Brenda's murder as well. The proximity of the crime scenes to Cosden's family businesses only deepened suspicions. But there was one problem: evidence. Brenda's body had been exposed to the elements for over a month before it was found. The advanced decomposition made it impossible to collect viable DNA. Unlike Catherine's case, there was no forensic trail, only circumstantial links and fading memories. Cosden was never charged in Brenda's case, and without new leads, her murder remained stuck in limbo, too cold to solve, too close to forget. Her parents never got answers. Her father died in 1979. Her mother passed away in 1989, just days before Ted Bundy was executed in Florida. Brenda's case became a symbol of how time and silence can erase even the strongest suspicions. In June 2024, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office launched a new cold case and missing persons unit. Led by Detective George Opplinger and Special Deputy Jim Lindsay, the two-person team is focused solely on solving the county's long-standing mysteries. The unit was made possible by a voter-approved public safety tax, giving investigators the resources to re-examine long-forgotten evidence. As of 2024, there are 30 active missing persons cases in Thurston County. 8 sets of unidentified remains found between 1981 and 2018 still await names. One of those cases is Patricia Garrison, murdered in 1970, her killer still unknown. But with new forensic tools, especially genetic genealogy, there's renewed hope that some answers may finally emerge. The murders that shook Olympia in the 1970s left more than grief in their wake. They reshaped a community. What had once felt like a quiet, safe corner of the Pacific Northwest was now a place where parents locked their doors earlier, where young women thought twice before hitchhiking, and where the woods, so familiar and serene, suddenly felt darker. For investigators, the memories remain vivid. Patricia Garrison's body beside her car, Catherine Devine in Capitol State Forest, Brenda Baker beneath a tangle of brush in Miller, Sylvania. William Cosden's conviction brought justice for one family, but it left others with questions that still haven't been answered. Was Cosden hiding more than one victim? What really happened to Brenda Joy Baker? And who stabbed Patricia Garrison on that cold January night? These cases stand as unresolved chapters, lives cut short, families left waiting, and communities left marked by unanswered questions. But they also reflect something else: the persistence of those who refuse to forget, the power of forensic science, and the belief that even in the darkest shadows, truth can still emerge. In Olympia and across the country, cold cases grow colder every year, but they're never truly forgotten, and sometimes, even decades later, justice has a way of catching up. The Oregon coast is a place of distinct beauty, where rocky shores meet pristine beaches. In the summer, it's a haven, drawing Oregonians seeking refuge from the inland heat. But when autumn arrives, the coast transforms. Massive waves crash onto the shores, thick fog cloaks the landscape, and torrents of rain lash the coast. This wild and untamed place hides dark secrets, veiled within the mysterious fog. And on a cold January night in 1995, two teenage girls, Jennifer Essen and Karen Leese, left a friend's house after a night of watching movies. They decided to walk home along Highway 101, the coastal road that threads its way through this magnificent yet treacherous landscape. But they never made it. Their bodies were found weeks later, covered with brush, in a secluded wooded area near Moolac Beach. They'd been strangled. Unfortunately, this was not an isolated incident. For nearly 3 decades, the Oregon coast has been haunted by a series of eerily similar unsolved murders, leaving families and investigators searching for answers. This is Northern Crimes. In May 1992, 19-year-old Sheila Swanson and 17-year-old Melissa Sanders went camping with the Sanders family at Beverly Beach State Park. Restless and seeking change, they decided to head back to Sweet Home, Oregon. They were last seen around 11 p.m. using a payphone near the campground, trying to contact someone for a ride. When the girls didn't return, their families grew worried and contacted the authorities. Initial search efforts focused on the campground and surrounding areas, but there was no trace of Sheila or Melissa. Flyers were distributed, and pleas for information were made through local media, but the case quickly grew cold as no leads surfaced. 5 months later, on October 13, 1992, 2 sets of skeletal remains were discovered near Highway 20, east of Newport. Loggers working in the isolated, wooded area stumbled upon the remains and immediately notified the authorities. The remains were identified as Sheila and Melissa. The medical examiner couldn't determine the exact cause of death, but confirmed they had met with foul play. The discovery of their bodies brought attention to a series of unsolved mysteries along the Oregon coast. Despite the grim finding, the investigation faced significant challenges. The remote location and the time elapsed since their disappearance meant that crucial evidence had likely been lost. Detectives interviewed friends, family, and anyone who'd been in the area during the time of the girls' disappearance, but no solid suspects emerged. One point of interest was the payphone the girls had used. Investigators tried to trace the calls made from the phone, hoping to uncover who the girls had contacted or if anyone had responded to their call for a ride. Unfortunately, the records were inconclusive, providing no clear direction for the investigation. As weeks turned into months, the lack of witnesses and physical evidence caused the case to go cold. The community was left in shock and fear as the idea of a possible killer lurking in their midst began to take hold. Unfortunately, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened in the Newport area. In March 1984, 17-year-old Kelly Disney disappeared after an argument with her boyfriend, Robert Ellis. The couple had a tumultuous relationship, and on the night of March 8th, a party at their apartment led to a heated argument. Around 12:30 a.m. on March 9th, Kelly left the apartment determined to cool off by walking along Highway 20. Despite the cold, drizzly night, Kelly was seen by multiple witnesses. Ellis, concerned for her safety, found her standing on Highway 20 but couldn't persuade her to get back into his car. He left, and 2 men later offered her a ride, which she refused. A sheriff's deputy also found Kelly near Southeast Moore Drive, but she declined help, saying she was heading to a friend's house. This was the last confirmed sighting of Kelly Disney. In the days following her disappearance, Kelly's family and friends organized frantic searches. The authorities, initially treating her as a runaway, conducted their own investigations but found no trace of her. Unfortunately, the case quickly became mired in confusion and miscommunication between the Newport Police Department and the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. 10 years later, on July 25, 1994, a man walked into the Newport Police Department carrying a skull he'd found near the Big Creek Reservoir. The skull was wrapped in carpet, and dental records confirmed it belonged to Kelly Disney. The discovery reignited the investigation, bringing both hope and despair to Kelly's family. While they finally had confirmation of her death, the circumstances remained a mystery. Investigators focused on Robert Ellis, Kelly's boyfriend, due to their volatile relationship. Despite extensive questioning and scrutiny, no conclusive evidence linked Ellis to the crime. Additionally, the unusual circumstances of the skull's discovery, placed in a location known for parties a decade after her disappearance, added to the perplexity. Witnesses who'd been in the area shortly before the skull was found denied seeing it, suggesting it had been placed there deliberately. The renewed investigation also explored other potential suspects and scenarios. The forensic examination of the skull revealed head injuries, but the cause of death remained undetermined. Despite these efforts, the case of Kelly Disney went cold once again, leaving her family and the community in limbo. On January 27, 1995, 15-year-old Jennifer Essen and 16-year-old Cara Lease spent the evening at a friend's house in Newport, Oregon. After a night of movies and fun, they decided to walk home along Highway 101 around 1 a.m. instead of calling Jennifer's older brother for a ride. The following morning, their families reported them missing, and a frantic search began. Despite the efforts of volunteers and police, no immediate clues were found. Weeks later, on February 13, 1995, loggers working near Moolock Beach discovered their bodies covered with brush. Both girls had been strangled. The community was devastated. The brutal murders of two young girls shocked everyone. Vigils were held, and the families pleaded for information. Detectives interviewed friends, family, and anyone who'd seen the girls that night. Crime scene photos revealed one of the first clues, a girl's shoe found near the bodies. The investigators considered the possibility of a serial killer, given the similarities to the other unsolved cases in the area. The manner of their deaths and the locations where their bodies were found resembled the 1992 murders of Sheila Swanson and Melissa Sanders. However, despite their efforts, no solid leads or suspects emerged. Bobby Jack Fowler, a drifter with a history of violent crimes, emerged as a potential suspect in the Oregon Coast Murders. Fowler's criminal record spanned several states and included numerous violent offenses, including assault. In 1995, Fowler was arrested in Newport after a woman fell from a balcony, escaping his violent assault. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Fowler was later linked to several murders in Canada through DNA evidence, particularly in British Columbia, where he was connected to the deaths of young women along the Highway of Tears. His transient lifestyle and criminal history made him a compelling suspect for the Oregon Coast Murders. However, despite the initial suspicion and investigation, no conclusive evidence was found to link Fowler to any of the murdered women in the area. John Arthur Ackroyd, a state highway worker, was another significant suspect, particularly in the cases of Sheila Swanson and Melissa Sanders. Ackroyd had a dark and violent history, including the 1978 murder of Kay Turner near Camp Sherman, Oregon. Ackroyd was also the prime suspect in the disappearance of his stepdaughter, Rashonda Pickle, whose body was never found. Aykroyd's connection to Highway 20, where Sheila Swanson and Melissa Sanders were last seen and later found, was particularly troubling. He lived and worked along this route, and his familiarity with the area gave him ample opportunity to commit such crimes. Witnesses reported seeing Aykroyd in a suspicious state shortly after the girls disappeared, adding to the circumstantial evidence against him. Despite these suspicions, Aykroyd was never charged with the murders before his death in prison in 2016. Robert Ellis, Kelly Disney's boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, was initially considered a suspect due to their tumultuous relationship and the argument they had the night she vanished. Ellis was one of the last people to see Kelly alive, and his refusal to cooperate with investigators raised suspicion. However, despite extensive questioning and scrutiny, no conclusive evidence ever linked Ellis to Kelly's murder. His behavior and the circumstances of their relationship made him a person of interest, but he was never formally charged. The possibility of a local perpetrator or a transient killer remains a theory. The remote locations where the bodies were found suggest someone with knowledge of the area could be involved. The lack of witnesses and physical evidence has made it challenging to identify a clear suspect. Over the years, various tips and leads have been investigated, but none have led to a definitive conclusion. Some speculate that the murders could be the work of multiple individuals rather than a single serial killer. The similarities in the cases, young girls walking alone or in pairs, disappearing along coastal highways, and their bodies being found in secluded, wooded areas, point to a possible connection. However, without concrete evidence, these remain theories. In the mid-2000s, the Newport Police Department re-examined these unsolved cases, spurred by advancements in DNA technology and new investigative techniques. Detective Ron Benson and Linda Snow, driven by a desire to bring closure to the families, took a fresh look at the evidence. The passage of time and lack of concrete evidence posed significant challenges, but their determination fueled the renewed investigation. Despite receiving over 300 tips, the investigation struggled to gain traction. Each tip was meticulously examined, but none provided the definitive breakthrough needed to solve the cases. Public appeals and media coverage played a crucial role in generating new leads. Angela Dodds, Kelly Disney's sister, spearheaded a poster and sign campaign in Lincoln County to keep her sister's memory alive and draw attention to the case. Her efforts, along with those of other families, brought renewed focus and community support. In 2009, Lincoln County District Attorney Rob Bovitt reactivated the Major Crimes Team to re-examine the unsolved homicides. New detectives, equipped with advanced DNA technology and national criminal databases, began reviewing evidence and re-interviewing witnesses. Bovitt emphasized the importance of modern forensic methods and the potential for DNA evidence to uncover new leads. The collaboration between detectives like Ron Benson and Linda Snow and the unwavering determination of the victims' families underscores the ongoing pursuit of justice for these unsolved murders. While the cases of Sheila Swanson, Melissa Sanders, Kelly Disney, Jennifer Essen, and Kara Lees remain unresolved, the continued investigation and public involvement provide hope. The memory of these young lives, lost too soon, serves as a reminder of the importance of persistence and community support in seeking justice. The dark secrets of the Oregon coast may one day be brought to light, offering closure to the grieving families and the community. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, October 1994. A lone hunter makes his way through a remote wooded area just southwest of the city. He's walked this land many times before, but today, something stops him in his tracks. Amid the fallen leaves and undergrowth, something pale stands out against the earth. It's a human skull, partially exposed. What began as a routine hunting trip quickly became a crime scene. Authorities arrived, and within days, they uncovered more remains. The discoveries raised urgent questions. Who were these victims? How had they ended up in this isolated place? And most chilling of all, how long had their killer been lurking in the shadows? Little did the investigators know they were about to unearth one of the darkest chapters in Saskatchewan's history. This is Northern Crimes. In the early 1990s, Saskatoon was a city on edge. For years, Indigenous women had been disappearing, their cases often dismissed or overlooked. Families had reported their loved ones missing, but answers were scarce. Many of these women were young. They were daughters, sisters, mothers. They had dreams and lives of their own. Among them was 16-year-old Shelley Napope, a teenager from the Duck Lake area. Described as outgoing and full of life, she had dreams of becoming a teacher. But in 1992, she vanished after last being seen in downtown Saskatoon. Eva Taysup, 30, was a mother of 4 from the Yellow Quill First Nation. Her family described her as fun-loving and fiercely protective of her children. She disappeared in 1992 without a trace. Kalinda Waterhen, 22, was known for her kindness and love for her family. She'd been struggling with difficult circumstances, but was working toward a better future. She too vanished in 1992, her fate unknown. For over 2 years, their families waited in agony, hoping for answers, but with little media attention and no significant leads, their cases remained open and unsolved. Then, the gruesome discovery in 1994 would finally force authorities to take a closer look. Who was behind these deaths, and how many more victims might be out there? When forensic anthropologists examined the remains found in the wooded area, they confirmed the worst fears of the families who'd been searching for their missing loved ones. The bodies were identified as Napope, Taysup, and Waterhen. The trio of women had been missing for years, their fates unknown until now. With the confirmation that these were homicide victims, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, launched an expansive investigation. They scoured missing persons reports, re-interviewed witnesses, and pieced together the final known moments of these women's lives. As detectives worked the case, disturbing patterns began to emerge. The victims shared commonalities beyond their tragic ends. They were all Indigenous women. They all vanished from the same city, and their bodies were all found discarded in the same remote location. The similarities were too striking to ignore. Investigators turned to local police records, hoping for a breakthrough, and that's when a name started appearing again and again, one that sent a chill through the law enforcement community: John Martin Crawford. Crawford was a man with a history of violence. His name was tied to past crimes, some of them disturbingly similar to these murders. As detectives continued combing through the old records, John Martin Crawford's name appeared with disturbing frequency, and what they uncovered about his past was even more chilling. In 1981, at just 19 years old, Crawford had been convicted of manslaughter for the brutal killing of 35-year-old Mary Jane Sirloin in Lethbridge, Alberta. Her body had been found mutilated, bearing bite marks that matched Crawford's teeth. Originally charged with first-degree murder, he took a plea deal and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but served only 7 before being released in 1989. Authorities now suspected that Crawford had resumed his crimes almost immediately after his release. The timeline of his movements aligned perfectly with the disappearances of Napope, Taysip, and Waterhen. But they needed more than suspicion. They needed undeniable proof. Police put Crawford under intense surveillance, watching his every move. It was during this period that they witnessed a shocking event, one that would later be cited as a devastating failure of the justice system. One night, Crawford picked up a woman named Teresa Kamach. Like many of his previous victims, she was an Indigenous woman living in Saskatoon. Crawford had a pattern. He targeted women who were vulnerable, women society had already overlooked. Under police watch, Crawford drove Kamach to a secluded area, and there, inside his car, he violently assaulted her, leaving her bruised, bloodied, and barely able to move. When he was finished, he abandoned her on the street, and what happened next defied all logic. Instead of going after Crawford, the man with a known violent history who had just been witnessed assaulting a woman, the police arrested Kamach. Why? Because she was intoxicated. Despite having just seen the attack, officers claimed she was disruptive and booked her instead of the man who'd brutalized her. Meanwhile, Crawford drove away without any consequence. It was a devastating failure of justice. A man suspected in multiple disappearances had just been handed a free pass, and for at least one more year, he would remain a free man until police could finally gather enough evidence to bring him down. In spite of the setback, detectives pressed on. They gathered witness statements, including testimony from a former associate of Crawford's who had first-hand knowledge of his crimes. The final piece of evidence came from forensic specialists. DNA and other physical evidence tied Crawford to the murders. There was no doubt he was responsible. In January 1995, police arrested Crawford and charged him with 3 counts of first-degree murder. In 1996, after years of uncertainty for the victims' families, John Martin Crawford stood trial in a Saskatoon courtroom. It was a case that many believed should have come to light sooner, but now, at last, the full scope of his crimes would finally be revealed. The prosecution laid out a chilling case, detailing how Crawford had lured his victims, subjected them to horrific crimes, and discarded their remains in the remote wooded area. Forensic evidence, witness testimony, and chilling confessions all pointed to one undeniable truth. Crawford was a predator who'd been hunting Indigenous women in Saskatchewan for years. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from a man named Bill Corrigan, a former associate of Crawford's who had first-hand knowledge of his crimes. On the witness stand, Corrigan recounted in disturbing detail how Crawford had targeted vulnerable women, coaxed them into his vehicle, and later bragged about what he'd done. Prosecutors played taped conversations between Crawford and Corrigan that had been secretly recorded during the investigation. On these tapes, Crawford was heard speaking with casual indifference about the crimes, showing no remorse for the women he'd killed.
I remember thinking, she's only worth $50.
He was recorded saying about one of his victims. When he took another woman's life, he reportedly thought,
fuck, here goes another one.
The courtroom fell silent as the full extent of Crawford's depravity became clear. For the families of Shelley Napope, Eva Tysup, and Kalinda Waterhen, the trial was a devastating ordeal. They'd spent years searching for answers, only to discover their daughters, sisters, and mothers had suffered unthinkable violence at the hands of a man who saw them as disposable. At several points during the trial, family members left the courtroom in tears as the details of their loved ones' final moments were recounted. The emotional weight of the proceedings was unbearable. Still, they remained determined to see justice served. The defense, meanwhile, offered little argument in Crawford's favor. His lawyers didn't bother to present a case for his innocence, nor did they attempt to refute the overwhelming evidence against him. Instead, they attempted to paint Crawford as mentally unstable, suggesting that his years of substance abuse and a difficult upbringing had shaped him into what he'd become. But the jury wasn't swayed by these excuses. After weeks of testimony and forensic evidence, the case went to deliberate, and it didn't take long. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was filled with families, journalists, and Indigenous activists who'd long fought for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women. At last, the decision was read. Guilty. 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 Crawford was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. The judge, in delivering his sentencing, didn't hold back. He described Crawford as a remorseless predator who'd targeted these women he believed no one would miss.
These young women had lives. They had families. They had dreams. You took that away from them without a second thought.
Crawford was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, Crawford showed no remorse. When the verdict was read, he sat motionless, his expression blank, offering no reaction to the reality that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But for the victims' families, justice felt incomplete. They'd fought for years to have their loved ones' disappearances taken seriously. They'd been ignored, dismissed, and even blamed. Now, as Crawford was led out of the courtroom in shackles, they were left to wonder, how many more women had suffered the same fate, forgotten, dismissed, erased, before their bodies were ever found? The Saskatchewan Murders are more than just a horrifying true crime case. They reflect a broader issue that continues to this day. The women who fell victim to John Martin Crawford were not nameless or forgotten by their families. They were loved, they had hopes and dreams, but they were preyed upon by a man who saw them as disposable. Crawford was caught and convicted, and in 2020, he died in prison. But many still ask, how many more women suffered the same fate, never to be found? And how many other cases like this have been overlooked simply because the victims were Indigenous? The Saskatchewan Murders serve as a haunting reminder that justice is not always blind, and that for some, it comes far too late. But the bigger question remains. How many more predators like John Martin Crawford have gone unnoticed, simply because their victims were women that society ignored? July 7th, 2012. What should be a peaceful weekend getaway into the Alaskan wilderness instead becomes the start of one of Alaska's most haunting unsolved disappearances. Valerie Sifsoff, a 43-year-old woman with deep ties to the state's fishing communities, vanishes from Granite Creek Campground without a trace. What follows is an agonizing search that stretches across months in a mystery that still lingers more than a decade later. What happens after midnight that night when Valerie walks away from her campsite? Is it the forest, the water, or something else entirely? I've spent many nights in those same woods. I've walked the game trails, swam in the glacier-fed creek, and I've seen things out there that I still can't explain. This is the true story of Valerie Sifsoff, one of Alaska's most haunting disappearances. And this is Northern Crimes. Granite Creek Campground sits tucked in the heart of Alaska's Chugach National Forest at mile 64 of the Seward Highway. It's remote but accessible, a place where locals and travelers alike go to disconnect. Towering spruce and hemlock trees surround the campground, and the sound of birds, rushing water, and mountain wind fills the air, drowning out the rest of the world. For Valerie Sifsoff, this setting was more than a retreat. It was a return to something familiar. Born in November 1968, Valerie had deep roots in Alaska. Her family was part of the fishing culture that shaped life around Bristol Bay. Her father, Victor, was a longtime fisherman, and their boat, the Valtrina, was named in part after her. Valerie grew up immersed in the rhythms of the sea and the seasons. She spent summers working on boats and at Ekuk Beach, helping her family with their fishing business. She even served as a page in the Alaska legislature and took art classes that reflected her creative spirit and cultural heritage. By 2012, Valerie had returned to Anchorage after spending time in Seattle. She was living with her longtime boyfriend and navigating a period of personal change. Friends and family described her as vibrant, affectionate, and caring. She enjoyed browsing bookstores, spending time with younger relatives, and staying connected to her community. That July weekend, Valerie and her boyfriend planned a simple trip, just a quiet weekend of camping near the water. Granite Creek was the perfect spot, close to Anchorage, but far enough into the wilderness to feel like an escape. So, I've made this drive many times. The highway curves along Turnagain Arm, winds through mountains, and skirts steep drop-offs. Civilization fades quickly. It's beautiful, yes, but the deeper you go, the easier it is to forget just how far out there you are. In fact, on a recent camping trip of my own to Granite Creek, I decided to explore further than usual, beyond the campsites, deeper into the forest. I followed faint game trails, and I stumbled onto something very strange, a crude survival shelter tucked far away from any trail. Built from logs and debris, it was clearly human-made, but abandoned. It felt unsettling, like something that wasn't meant to be found. And standing there alone in the silence, I was reminded that these forests are vast and wild, and that anything can happen out here. It's weird, man. It's honestly like super creepy back here. I mean, in addition to this being absolute total bear country, it doesn't take long behind this campground where you just kind of, I don't know, man. If you weren't good with direction, you could get turned around real quick, and I don't know. I also think about Valerie Sifsoff, who disappeared in this campground a bunch of years ago. I think about her every time I come here, and I don't know, man, just seeing this little shelter here just freaked me out. Whoever was out here dropped trees with what looks like an axe. Some other trees dropped here. I mean, it's like, was somebody like squatting here? Or like, did somebody build this for fun? I mean, this is like a pretty serious shelter. Like, these are, this is like a real shelter, like a real wilderness shelter. And they're right by a water source. And it's honestly totally hidden from the campground. It's probably 150 yards back in the woods, which 150 yards is actually, It's quite a distance, really. Let's look through here a little bit more. A little bit of a trail. A tree that got cut. But then the trail just kind of disappears. I mean, there's not really a trail. It just kind of disappears. I'm gonna go walk over to this creek and see what I can see. I don't know, maybe I'll cross this thing tomorrow morning if the weather's good and see if I can find more of a trail here that heads over to the main river. I'm gonna get in this thing and see if there's anything in there. Doesn't look like it. This is creepy, man. Well, I'm not gonna hang out here too much longer. All right, back to the campground. If I can find it. Okay, here's the trail that I had blazed through earlier. Okay, there's my campsite. That night, campground was quiet. As I sat by the fire, I couldn't stop thinking about Valerie, or creepy shelter I'd stumbled on earlier. I tried to clear my mind. I set up my tent. I listened to some podcasts, but every noise I heard made me think something was out there. Finally, around 2 a.m, I settled in and tried to get some sleep. Back in 2012, Valerie was camped out not far from where I was. Like me, she was just trying to enjoy a weekend away. According to her boyfriend, they'd settled in for the night, but sometime around midnight, everything changed. The only real account of what happened that night comes from Valerie's boyfriend. He told investigators that they'd gotten into an argument and that Valerie walked off into the night. This was something he said wasn't unusual in their relationship. They often gave each other space after disagreements, but this time, Valerie didn't come back. She left behind her keys, her ID, her phone, everything. Days passed with no sign of her, and it wasn't until July 11th, 4 full days later, that she was reported missing to the Alaska State Troopers. The delay raised questions. Why wait 4 days to report someone missing in such remote terrain? Her boyfriend claimed they often gave each other space, but 4 days in the Alaskan wilderness seemed dangerously long. Later, it would come out that he thought she had gotten back to Anchorage somehow and just chose not to contact him. But unfortunately, he was wrong. The details in the report were chilling. Valerie was last seen wearing a black sweatshirt-style jacket, blue sweatpants, and black boots. She stood 5'5" and weighed around 120 pounds. She'd vanished into some of the roughest terrain in the state. The search effort that followed was enormous. Valerie's father, Victor, was fishing in Bristol Bay when he first got the call. He flew back to Anchorage immediately and rushed to the campground. He would spend the next several months consumed by the search for his daughter. Family, friends, troopers, military personnel, and volunteers all joined in. They covered every inch of the surrounding forest on foot, scoured the riverbanks, and sent helicopters overhead. Boats searched nearby waters, including the 6 Mile River. Search dogs traced scent trails that led nowhere. The terrain worked against them at every turn. Granite Creek is swift and cold, fed by melting snow and heavy summer rains. The forest around it is a maze of dense alders, trees, steep ravines, game trails, and old logging roads. At night, it's nearly impossible to navigate without light, or at least a sense of direction. And out there, believe me, it's easy to get turned around. Despite the best efforts of everyone involved, no trace of Valerie was found during those first critical weeks. And then the weather turned. A brutal storm swept through the region, dumping 9 inches of rain, even some snow. The search had to be suspended. But the family never stopped. They organized their own searches. They posted flyers and launched a blog to keep Valerie's name in the public eye. They knew the odds were shrinking, but they refused to let the trail go cold. Then, a few months later, something finally surfaced. In the fall of 2012, clothing matching what Valerie had been wearing was found near 6 Mile Creek. A green shirt, a black DKNY hoodie, items her family immediately recognized. It was a devastating discovery. For those who understood the currents and the river system in Alaska, the meaning was clear. If Valerie had fallen into the creek, the water could have carried her clothing far from the point of entry, while her body remained hidden. That discovery reignited the search, but also raised new questions. If she'd fallen into the creek, how did she get to that location? Had she wandered farther than anyone thought? Or was she somewhere else entirely before ending up near the water? As time went on, the mystery of what happened to Valerie only grew. The clothing was the only real evidence ever recovered. No body, no witness sightings, no phone signals, nothing. The family kept searching. They followed tips. They brought in psychics. They used their blog to collect and track every lead. They reached out to the media. Valerie's niece, an Olympic snowboarder, used her platform to keep the case in the public eye. But nothing else surfaced, just a quiet, eerie stillness. When I explored the forests around Granite Creek just a few weeks ago, I thought about how that stillness must have felt to Valerie's family. The endless trees, the cold water, the hidden places that no one ever finds unless they know exactly where to look. The survival shelter I discovered, it really creeped me out. Not because I think it necessarily has anything to do with Valerie's case, but because it reminded me that people have been out here, living and moving through this forest in ways most of us never see. And if someone wanted to hide something or someone, this is definitely the place to do it. In 2016, 4 years after Valerie vanished, the courts granted a presumptive death certificate. Her father accepted the legal reality, but not the emotional one. There were still too many unanswered questions, still too much unfinished. And even after that, the family kept looking. They spoke out on missing persons issues. They connected with other families in similar situations. And in Alaska, there's a lot of those situations. They refused to let Valerie become just another statistic. One prevailing theory is that Valerie likely slipped into the creek and drowned. It's the simplest explanation. The water is fast, cold, and dangerous. But even her father, who believed this explanation was the most likely, couldn't stop hoping for more answers. Because if it was that simple, why haven't they found her? More than a decade has passed since Valerie Sifsoff vanished. The campground remains open. Families still visit. Campfires still crackle. But for those who know what happened here, the place feels different. It certainly does for me. Valerie's story lives on in flyers, in blog posts, and in the memories of those who loved her. Her father must think of her every day. Her family still drives that highway, scanning the trees, wondering if maybe, just maybe, something will finally appear. The Valerie they remember was joyful and bright. She loved art, family gatherings, and the deep traditions of her culture. She had plans, hopes, people who loved her. Her family has shared those memories so that she's not defined by her disappearance, but by the life she lived before it. Alaska has one of the highest rates of missing persons in the U.S. Its landscape is breathtaking, but it's also brutal, remote, unforgiving. And for those trying to find answers, it often feels like the land itself is working against them. Even now, her case remains open. Alaska State Troopers still welcome tips. The family still offers a reward for any information that might lead to answers. They're not seeking revenge, they just want to know what happened. A few weeks ago, when I stood again by the creek, listening to the endless flow of water, I thought about how quickly someone could vanish here. One misstep, one turn off the trail, and then nothing but trees, time, and the elements. Or maybe it wasn't an accident. That question, the one that no one can answer, is what makes this case so haunting. Valerie didn't plan to vanish. She had people to see, things to do, a life she was still building. She deserved more than to disappear without a trace. Somewhere out there, the final piece of her story is waiting. And until it's found, her family is going to keep searching. Her story will keep echoing through the forest, and her name won't be forgotten. If you have any information about the disappearance of Valerie Sifsoff, please contact Alaska State Troopers at 907-262-4453 or the Alaska Bureau of Investigation Missing Persons Clearinghouse at 907-269-5038. Reference incident number AK122-19013. This video was for Valerie and for every family still waiting. Canada spans nearly 10 million square kilometers, a country defined by vast wilderness, remote highways, and isolated communities. But in that distance lies danger. The same terrain that draws adventurers also allows violence to go unseen. On back roads without cell service, along highways where no one stops, and in small towns unaccustomed to outsiders, some disappear without a trace. In these places, the wilderness doesn't just hide beauty, it conceals secrets. From coast to coast, bodies have turned up in shallow graves, lakes, and dense forests. Evidence fades, leads stall, and in many cases, the killers are never found. In this episode, we investigate 6 unsolved cases, ordinary lives disrupted by extraordinary violence, spanning 5 decades and reaching from British Columbia to Quebec. These stories remain cold, but they're not forgotten. This is Northern Crimes. On September 15th, 1971, 29-year-old Mary Ann Plett gave her 8-year-old son Nelson a kiss at breakfast and headed off to work at Graham Realty in Edmonton, Alberta. It was the last time he would ever see his mother's smiling face. By evening, Mary Ann had vanished without a trace, launching one of the largest searches in Alberta's history and leaving behind a mystery that haunts investigators more than 5 decades later. Mary Ann was a trailblazer in every sense of the word. As one of Edmonton's first female real estate agents, she was determined to succeed in a male-dominated industry. A deeply religious woman with strong family ties, she was devoted to her husband Jake and their 2 sons. Her colleagues at Graham Realty on White Avenue knew her as hardworking and professional, which made her final client meeting all the more disturbing. For weeks, Mary Ann had been dealing with an unusual prospect who called himself James Cooper. Unlike typical clients, Cooper was evasive and demanding. He would only deal directly with Mary Ann by phone, refused to provide a return number, and pressed for last-minute appointments at odd hours. Cooper claimed to represent a large American mud pump company based out of Winnipeg, seeking property with a clearing to store heavy equipment, but he wanted the view blocked from the road for privacy. On that fateful September morning, Cooper arranged to meet Mary Ann at the Bonnie Doon Shopping Center at 11 a.m. She was to drive him to view an acreage near Luma, 30 kilometers southeast of Edmonton. By 5 p.m., when Mary Ann failed to return to the office, her coworkers and husband Jake knew something was terribly wrong. The search began immediately. Police combed the Luma property, but found no trace of Mary Ann or the mysterious James Cooper. Then, around 11 p.m., Jake spotted Mary Ann's green 1970 Pontiac Laurentian slowly driving past the office with a male driver behind the wheel. By the time he and the coworkers gave chase, the car had vanished into the night. 2 days later, the vehicle was discovered abandoned at Don Wheaton Car Sales, just blocks from Mary Ann's office. The car told a chilling story: damage to the front fender, a gouged rear tire, grass stalks lodged into the bumper, and a 2-foot tree branch wedged in the undercarriage. Most ominously, blood matching Mary Ann's type was found on the trunk rug and latch, along with the wig she wore. 7 agonizing months passed before Mary Ann's remains were found in April 1972. 2 sawmill employees discovered women's clothing scattered along Goose Lake Road, 100 kilometers northwest of Edmonton. A search revealed a watch given to Mary Ann by her mother, along with the top portion of a human skull and part of a femur, identified through dental records as Mary Ann Plett. The cause of death remains unknown. The case devastated the family further when Jake, who had tirelessly worked to solve his wife's murder and even wrote a book titled Valley of the Shadows, died in a 1978 plane crash in Cranbrook, BC, along with 40 others. Today, Nelson Platt honors his father's memory, promising to forgive his mother's killer if he's ever found, just as Jake had vowed to do. On Friday, November 3rd, 1978, 19-year-old Teresa Allure disappeared from Champlain College, Lennoxville, in Quebec's eastern townships. What began as a missing person case would evolve into one of Canada's most enduring mysteries, a story of systemic failures, family determination, and a brother's decades-long quest for justice. Teresa was a vibrant college student with shoulder-length brown hair and a love for David Bowie. Standing 5 feet 5 inches tall, she lived in a dormitory residence in Compton, about 15 minutes from the main campus. On that fateful Friday evening, friends invited her to join them for weekend activities, but Teresa declined, saying she planned to study instead. The last confirmed sighting placed Teresa at her residence around 9 p.m. She'd promised to meet 2 friends later that night, but never showed up. When she failed to appear for her usual activities the next day, concern began to mount among her classmates and dormitory staff. What happened next would haunt the Allure family for decades. Police initially dismissed Teresa's disappearance, suggesting she was simply a runaway, a common assumption that would prove tragically wrong. The lazy attitude of both college officials and investigating officers meant crucial early hours were lost, evidence potentially destroyed, and leads never pursued. 5 agonizing months passed before the truth emerged. On April 13, 1979, Good Friday, a muskrat trapper made a grim discovery in a small body of water approximately 1 kilometer from Teresa's dormitory. Her body was found wearing only underwear, and the condition of her remains suggested she'd been murdered. Even then, authorities failed Teresa and her family. Police initially suggested she might have died from a drug overdose, perhaps with assistance from fellow students. This victim-blaming approach would characterize the investigation for years, with officials more interested in protecting the college's reputation than finding Teresa's killer. The case might have remained buried in bureaucratic indifference, if not for the determination of Teresa's younger brother, John Allure. Though only 14 when his sister disappeared, John would grow up to become her most dedicated advocate. In 2002, he enlisted investigative reporter Patricia Garrison, who produced a series of articles for Canada's National Post that presented compelling evidence that Teresa was murdered. John's investigation revealed disturbing patterns. He identified potential connections to other unsolved cases, including the deaths of Louise Camarand in 1977 and 10-year-old Manon Dubé in March 1978. Geographic profiler Kim Rosmo, then an FBI consultant, supported the theory that a serial predator may have been operating in the Quebec region during the late 1970s. The family's advocacy led to significant changes in Quebec's justice system. In 2004, largely due to John's lobbying efforts, the Sûreté du Québec created its first cold case unit. In 2019, Montreal police established their own cold case squad, again influenced by the Allure family's persistent efforts. Tragically, John Allure died in a bicycle accident in March 2023, never seeing justice for his sister. His book with Patricia Garrison, Wish You Were Here, suggests that failures in the system allowed a serial predator named Luc Grégoire to operate freely in 1970s Quebec. Today, Teresa's case remains officially unsolved, but her brother's legacy lives on in the cold case units he helped create. In October 1983, two young German tourists embarked on what should have been the adventure of a lifetime, a hitchhiking journey through the rugged wilderness of northern British Columbia. Instead, 22-year-old Andrea Scherpf and 27-year-old Bernd Goricke became victims of one of Canada's most enduring unsolved murders, a case that would expose the deadly dangers lurking along remote Canadian highways. Andrea and Bernd were the embodiment of youthful wanderlust. The engaged couple had traveled from West Germany to explore Canada's vast landscapes, carrying backpacks filled with camping gear, a guitar, and dreams of adventure. Andrea, born on December 31st, 1959, carried a Canon camera to document their journey, while Bernd, born June 29th, 1956, brought along his daily diary written in German. On or around October 3rd, 1983, the couple was last seen hitchhiking near Dawson Creek, heading westbound toward Chetwynd, British Columbia. They accepted a ride from a stranger driving a 1960s Chevrolet pickup truck, a decision that would cost them their lives. The unidentified driver shot both victims and dumped their bodies 32 kilometers south of Chetwynd near Highway 97 and the Pine River. But the killer wasn't finished. In a calculated move to cover his tracks, he stole the couple's belongings and used Andrea's traveler's checks to purchase gasoline on October 4th and 5th at stations in Prince George, Quesnel, Macleese Lake, Lac Lache, and 100 Mile House, creating a trail that led investigators south through British Columbia's interior. The bodies were discovered on October 6, 1983, but it took 10 days for authorities to identify the victims through Interpol and dental records. The killer had also dumped a pair of blood-spattered jeans in a nearby trash can, evidence that would later prove crucial in eliminating false suspects. The investigation that followed was marked by both determination and devastating mistakes. In 1991, a man named Andy Rose was convicted of the murders based largely on the testimony of co-worker Madonna Mary Kelly, who claimed Rose had arrived at her door drunk and covered in blood, confessing to killing two people. Rose spent nearly 10 years in prison before DNA evidence in 1996 proved his innocence, leading to his release in 2001. Another suspect emerged when Vance Hill's widow told her nephew that her deceased husband had confessed to the murders before taking his own life in 1985. According to her account, Hill claimed the couple had asked for a ride, but when he began harassing Andrea and Bernd protested, Hill shot him.
The woman screamed and didn't want to shut up.
However, DNA evidence later eliminated Hill as well. The case remains officially unsolved, with DNA evidence pointing to an unknown third person whose identity continues to elude investigators. In 2024, a woman named Amanda Nicole came forward claiming her deceased birth father had been questioned and released in connection with the case, offering to provide DNA to help bring closure to this decades-old mystery. Andrea and Burns' disappearance exposes the dark reality faced by hitchhikers on remote highways, where isolation removes the thin veneer of safety that civilization provides. In the early hours of a summer morning in 1991, a young Indigenous woman vanished into the night along Logan Avenue in Winnipeg. By dawn, she was gone, and nearly a month later, her brutalized body was found near a riverbank, hidden among wooden beams. Her name was Glenda Morisseau. 19 years old, a student, a sister, a daughter. Her disappearance would become one of the many haunting chapters in Canada's ongoing crisis of violence against Indigenous women. Glenda was originally from the Saugeen First Nation, but lived with her mother and stepfather in Winnipeg. She was attending R.B. Russell School and, by all accounts, carving out a hopeful future. On July 16, 1991, she spent the evening at the Stock Exchange Hotel with friends and her brother Mitchell. They played pool, had a few drinks, and then she left with others. That was the last time her family saw her alive. Around 2:30 a.m. on July 17th, witnesses reported seeing Glenda hitchhiking along Logan Avenue. She was picked up by a man driving a dark, older model station wagon, possibly with light yellow seat covers. The driver was described as middle-aged. That small detail would later take on chilling significance. For the next 3 weeks, her family searched, pleaded, and waited. On August 7th, 1991, a grim discovery was made at St. Boniface. A worker stumbled upon a partially clothed body in a field used for industrial storage near the end of Youville Street. It was Glenda. The scene was brutal. Her body showed signs of extreme trauma. Her jaw, cheekbones, and eye socket shattered by a large, blunt object. She wore only a t-shirt, jacket, and socks. Her lower body was unclothed. The level of decomposition suggested she'd been left there for some time. Investigators believed she was killed elsewhere and dumped at the site, possibly in the vehicle she was last seen entering. Today, the area has been redeveloped into housing, but at the time, it was remote, accessible only to someone who knew that terrain. That detail led police to suspect the killer had ties to St. Boniface. The case remains open. Despite early leads and continued efforts, no one has ever been charged with Glenda's murder. In 2017, her story was featured in APTN's Taken, a series spotlighting unsolved cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women. But the mystery persists and justice has never come. Her brother, Mitchell, still struggles with the silence that followed Glenda's death.
She was a Native woman, and they don't really care about what's happening with her.
For the Morisseau family, the pain didn't end there. Years later, Glenda's niece, Kelly Morisseau, would also be murdered, becoming part of the same devastating national pattern. Glenda Morisseau's life was more than a statistic. She was loved, she was full of promise, and more than 3 decades later, her story remains a solemn reminder of how many voices have gone unheard. On March 10, 1993, professional wrestling lost one of its most beloved stars in the most brutal way imaginable. Dino Bravo, the Canadian strongman who'd thrilled audiences for over 2 decades, was found shot dead in his Laval, Quebec home, the victim of an execution-style killing that exposed the dark intersection between sports entertainment and organized crime. Born Adolfo Bresciano on August 6, 1948 in Campobasso, Italy, Dino immigrated to Canada as a child, settling in Montreal. What began as amateur wrestling training at age 12 would evolve into a legendary career that saw him become one of Canada's biggest wrestling stars, capturing multiple championships, including the Canadian International Heavyweight Championship 6 times. But it was Dino's time in the World Wrestling Federation that made him a household name. Wrestling fans remember his infamous world record bench press attempt at the 1988 Royal Rumble, where he claimed to lift 715 pounds with help from Jesse the Body Ventura. Playing the role of Canada's strongest man, Dino became a heel character who wore the fleur-de-lis and was managed by Frenchie Martin, who carried signs reading, "USA is not okay." Behind the theatrical persona, however, lay a man struggling with financial pressures. After leaving the WWF in 1992, Dino found himself in a precarious position. As fellow wrestler Rick Martel later revealed,
Dino had painted himself into a corner. He tried to stay in the WWF, but Vince didn't want to have him back. Dino liked the high lifestyle. He had a sports Mercedes. He had a big home. And suddenly, wrestling was over.
The solution to Dino's money problems came through family connections that would ultimately prove fatal. His Aunt Maria was married to Vic Catroni, the powerful boss of Montreal's mafia family. According to sources, Dino began working as muscle for the organization, collecting debts and intimidating those who owed money to the mob's loan-sharking operations. The illegal cigarette smuggling trade in early 1990s Canada provided Dino with what seemed like easy money. Working with indigenous groups who controlled river crossings, he developed a monopoly on moving untaxed cigarettes across the border. But when cocaine dealers wanted in on his operation, everything went wrong. According to Rick Martel's account, Dino agreed to a partnership that involved storing $400,000 worth of cocaine in a warehouse. When the pickup was delayed and police discovered the drugs, both sides blamed each other. The heat on Dino became unbearable. On that fateful March evening, Dino was at home watching hockey while his wife and daughter attended ballet lessons. When they returned, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. Dino had been shot 17 times, 7 bullets to the head and 10 to the torso. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting he knew his killers. The remote control was found loose in his hand, indicating he never saw the attack coming. As investigators noted, if someone is shot from the front, they tense their muscles and grip objects tightly. The loose remote meant Dino was shot from behind while relaxing. Nearly 3 decades later, Dino Bravo's murder remains officially unsolved, a chilling reminder of what happens when the world of entertainment collides with organized crime. In the summer and fall of 1995, British Columbia's Fraser Valley became the hunting ground for a serial killer who claimed 3 lives and then vanished without a trace. Within just 2 months, 3 women were found murdered in remote areas, their bodies bearing the same horrific signature. Nearly 3 decades later, their killer remains free, and their case stands as a haunting reminder of justice denied. The terror began on August 12, 1995, when the nude body of 30-year-old Tracy Olajide was discovered on a trail near Morris Valley Logging Road in Agassiz. Tracy, an African-Canadian mother of 1, had been last seen 2 days earlier near the Waldorf Hotel in Vancouver's downtown east side. Despite efforts to leave sex work behind, her struggle with crack cocaine addiction kept drawing her back to the dangerous streets where predators lurked. Tracy had been assaulted and strangled to death. Her body was left in a desolate area that required intimate knowledge of the terrain to access, yet positioned where it would eventually be found. The killer wanted his work to be discovered. 3 weeks later, on September 2nd, the pattern repeated itself. 24-year-old Tammy Pipe's nude body was found in the middle of a remote side road north of Lafitte Highway, leading to the Mount Woodside hang glider launch area. Tammy, an Indigenous woman who dreamed of becoming a professional dancer, had been last seen on August 29th at the Cobalt Hotel on Main Street in Vancouver. Like Tracy, Tammy had been assaulted and strangled. Red paint flecks found at the scene suggested the killer drove a damaged red 4x4 vehicle, something capable of navigating the rough terrain where he dumped his victims. The final confirmed victim was discovered on October 21st, 1995. Victoria Younker's nude and partially decomposed body was found 25 feet down an embankment off a dead-end logging road on Sylvester Road near Mission. The 35-year-old white woman had been missing since September 11th, where she was last seen at social assistance offices on Hastings Street. Forensics determined she'd been dead for at least 30 days before being discovered. All three women shared tragic commonalities. They were involved in survival sex work in Vancouver's downtown east side, struggled with drug addiction, and were found nude, assaulted, and strangled in remote Fraser Valley locations. The proximity of the disposal sites and the identical modus operandi left no doubt a serial killer was stalking vulnerable women. Investigators theorized the killer was familiar with the area, possibly a logger, fisherman, hunter, or someone connected to a nearby work release program. Evidence suggested he wrapped victims' bodies in weathered yellow rain gear during transport, then removed it before disposal. Two prime suspects emerged over the years. Ronald Richard McCauley, a local roofer with a history of sexual assault, was cleared by DNA testing in 2001. Even notorious serial killer Robert Willie Pickton was ruled out through DNA evidence, despite operating in the same area and targeting similar victims. The killer's DNA remains in police possession, but no matches have been found in databases. In 2011, RCMP interviewed a suspect in Alberta, but nothing came of the investigation. Today, the Hemlock Valley murders remain unsolved. Across provinces and decades, these cases share a painful common thread. Lives lost, families shattered, and justice delayed. The passage of time has faded headlines and thinned evidence, but the questions remain unanswered and unresolved. In each story, there are names, not just statistics. Teresa, Marianne, Glenda, Andrea, Bernd, Dino, Tracy, Tammy, and Victoria. Their stories are not closed. Their killers, in many cases, still walk free. As the years stretch on, hope may grow dim, but it hasn't disappeared. Cold cases don't die, they wait, and someone, somewhere, knows the truth. Alaska is a land of extremes. Vast wilderness, brutal cold, and breathtaking isolation. But it's not just the weather that turns dangerous. People disappear here. Bodies turn up with no names. Planes vanish from the sky. Even serial killers leave victims behind that no one can identify. In this video, we're diving into 5 of Alaska's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Stories that remain unanswered decades later. These are the cases that confound detectives, haunt families, and challenge everything we think we know about the last frontier. This is Northern Crimes. It was July 1980 when utility workers checking power lines near Eklutna Lake Road made a chilling discovery: the body of a young woman buried in a shallow grave outside of Anchorage. She had no ID, no missing persons report, and no one waiting for her return. For over 4 decades, she's been known only by a name tied to where she was found: Eklutna Annie. The medical examiner believed she was between 16 and 25, around 5 feet tall, with light brown hair tinged with red. She wore a brown leather jacket, jeans, and red knee-high boots, the kind you'd remember. Her jewelry was distinctive: turquoise-studded copper bracelet, beaded necklace, gold hoop earrings, and a Timex watch with a brown face. What makes this case even more disturbing is that we know who killed her, but not who she was. In 1984, serial killer Robert Hansen confessed to Annie's murder, saying she was his first victim. By then, Hansen was infamous, a quiet Anchorage baker and father. He'd secretly abducted, assaulted, and murdered at least 17 women between 1971 and 1983, often flying them into the wilderness to hunt them like prey. According to Hansen's confession, he picked up Annie in downtown Anchorage sometime in late 1979. When she realized he wasn't taking her home, she panicked. He pulled a gun and told her to, quote,
"Do exactly as I say, and you won't get hurt."
He drove her toward Eklutna Lake, but when his truck got stuck in the mud, she tried to run. Hansen caught her, dragged her down, and stabbed her in the back with a hunting knife as she pleaded for her life. Detective Maxine Farrell, one of the few investigators who believed a serial killer was targeting women in Anchorage, suspected Annie had been a dancer or a sex worker. Her clothing and jewelry matched those worn by women from the city's nightlife scene, a detail Farrell had seen far too many times. Over the years, many missing women were compared to Eklutna Annie, including Roxanne Eastland and Megan Emmerich, but DNA testing ruled them out. Forensic artists have created facial reconstructions, and her case remains open, but no name has ever been confirmed. Today, she lies in Anchorage Memorial Park Cemetery beneath a headstone marked only Jane Doe, died 1980. She is the only known victim of Robert Hansen, who remains unidentified. As advocate, Autumn Smith once said,
"She deserves just as much of a search for her people as any other victim, as any other survivor."
even when a killer is caught, some stories are left unfinished. Eklutna Annie's real name, her life before the violence, is still missing. Every 4th of July, thousands gather in Seward, Alaska, to witness one of the state's most grueling traditions, the Mount Marathon race. It's just 3 miles long, but with a vertical climb of over 3,000 feet straight up a mountain face, it's not for the faint of heart. In 2012, it became the backdrop for a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. That year, 66-year-old Anchorage businessman Michael Lemiter decided to run Mount Marathon for the first time. Despite the dangerous terrain and slick, foggy conditions, he was determined to finish. Around 6 p.m., a race official saw him just 200 feet from the summit, the last confirmed sighting of Lemiter. He never came back down. What makes this disappearance so unsettling is that Mount Marathon towers directly over the town of Seward. It's not deep wilderness. You can see the mountain from nearly every street, and during the race, it's lined with volunteers and packed with spectators. And yet, somehow, Lemiter vanished in plain sight. As soon as he was reported missing, a massive search effort was launched. Helicopters equipped with infrared, search dogs, and dozens of volunteers combed the trails, ravines, and cliffs. His scent was picked up briefly, but the trail ended abruptly at an old structure high on the mountain. No trace of him was ever found. No clothing, no equipment, nothing. The conditions that day were unusually treacherous. 2 other runners were seriously injured. One fell off a cliff and suffered internal injuries, while another broke both legs and sustained a traumatic brain injury after slipping on the same descent. Lemiter's daughter, Marianne, spent more than a month hiking the mountain herself. She wanted to understand the path her father took, to feel the terrain he walked. On her final trip, she carved, "I love you, Dad," into a summit rock with a Dremel tool. Theories vary. Some believe he took a fatal fall into one of the steep ravines or was buried under a snow bridge. Others think he may have accidentally wandered off course and continued down an unmarked trail. A few suggest wildlife could have been involved, but none of these theories have produced answers. In October 2012, a judge declared Michael Lemiter legally dead. His wife later reached a $25,000 settlement with the Seward Chamber of Commerce, and the race implemented new safety rules requiring participants to have completed the course previously. Still, his case remains open. Technically, Michael Lemiter is not a dead man. He's a missing person, a man swallowed by a mountain that thousands climb every year. His final moments remain a mystery, and his story remains one of Alaska's most perplexing disappearances, a reminder that sometimes, even in full view, people can simply vanish. The tide was low on a quiet June afternoon in 2003 when two young siblings walking along Beluga Point spotted what they thought was a dead animal tangled in the seaweed. But it wasn't a sheep or a seal. It was the torso of a woman, headless, legless, and dumped into Alaska's Cook Inlet. It was a gruesome discovery, and it was just the beginning. 3 months later, on September 6th, a father and son duck hunting in the Ocean View mudflats, less than a few miles from the first site, found another torso. Again, it was a young woman, dismembered in the same way, her remains discarded like the first. The similarities were unmistakable. The violence was calculated. Someone had killed these women and made them disappear, or at least tried to. For over a year, the first victim remained unidentified, but DNA testing eventually revealed she was 22-year-old Desiree Lekanoff, reported missing by a former boyfriend. The second torso was identified more quickly. A distinctive tattoo reading Marty's on the lower back led to 32-year-old Michelle Roth, a fellow inmate at Highland Mountain Correctional Facility, recognized the tattoo and gave police her name. Both women were known to police. Both had worked along Anchorage's notorious Spenard Avenue, a corridor long associated with prostitution and drug activity. Both had histories of addiction, particularly to crack cocaine, and both had been swept into a violent underground world of trafficking and exploitation. At the center of that world were two predators: Don Arthur Webster, a violent pimp known on the street as Jerry Starr, and Joseph Boehm, a wealthy Anchorage businessman who trafficked young women under the nickname Joe Millionaire. Webster was brutal, beating and controlling the women he exploited. Boehm lured girls in with drugs and a place to stay and kept them there with threats. When Boehm was arrested on drug charges in 2003, he made chilling remarks to investigators about a girl named Ruby. Ruby was the alias of Michelle Roth. Boehm never revealed what he knew about the murders. He died in 2014, serving a 13-year sentence for sex trafficking and drug charges. Webster, meanwhile, was convicted and ordered to pay $3.6 million in restitution, one of the largest sex trafficking penalties in U.S. history. The investigation into the torso killings also uncovered at least 5 other missing women connected to Anchorage's underground scene, including Tracy Vicente, Robin Van Sickle, and Samantha Kent. Whether their disappearances are linked remains unknown. Desiree Lekanoff and Michelle Roth were finally identified, but their killer never was. Fed by glaciers and ringed with beauty, the waters of Cook Inlet seem serene, but for 2 women, they became a graveyard. Their bodies washed ashore in pieces, their stories barely recovered, and the person who left them there, still unknown. Few men have lived closer to the edge of human endurance than Naomi Umera. Soft-spoken and unassuming, the Japanese adventurer built a global reputation by going where no one else dared to go, and doing it by himself. By his early 40s, Umera had climbed Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, and the Matterhorn solo. He became the first person to reach the North Pole by himself, narrowly surviving a polar bear attack and nearly drowning when the ice cracked beneath him. Then he completed a 12,000-kilometer dog sled journey from Greenland to Alaska, a world record at the time. But it was his final expedition, a solo winter ascent of Denali, North America's tallest mountain, that would become his most legendary and his most mysterious. On February 12, 1984, Umera reached the summit of Denali on his 43rd birthday. A bush pilot photographing the mountain spotted him near the peak and received a brief radio transmission confirming the climb. Umera reported that he had descended to about 18,000 feet and planned to reach base camp in the next 2 days. And then, silence. Umera was no stranger to calculated risk. Born in rural Japan in 1941, he began mountain climbing in college as a way to overcome shyness and gain confidence. It worked, though not in the way most people would imagine. Instead of becoming more social, he became more solitary. The mountains gave him purpose, discipline, and something more elusive: peace. For his Denali attempt, he traveled light, no tent, minimal fuel. He intended to sleep in snow caves and ration cold food, even raw caribou, to save weight. He designed his own crevasse rescue device and brought bamboo poles to probe unstable terrain. To those who knew his track record, these choices weren't reckless. They were Umera's way. When he failed to appear at base camp on February 15th, a search effort was launched. At first, there was hope. A pilot named Doug Geeding reported seeing a lone figure waving from an ice cave at 16,000 feet. The next day, however, clouds rolled in, grounding rescue flights. When the skies finally cleared, there was nothing. Searchers found his bamboo poles at 9,500 feet. At 14,000 feet, they found his diary, still tucked away in his gear. And in a snow cave at 17,200 feet, which is usually Denali's high camp, they discovered a haunting cache: his sleeping bag liner, climbing equipment, food, fuel, even film from his camera. But there was no sign that he had ever descended to the point where the pilot had seen him. The last line in his journal read,
"I wish I could sleep in a warm sleeping bag. No matter what happens, I'm going to climb Mount McKinley."
Many believe he attempted to descend the steep headwall between 16,000 and 14,000 feet, one of the most dangerous sections of the mountain, and either fell into a crevasse or was buried by an avalanche. Others have questioned the pilot's sighting altogether. Could it have been a hallucination, a misidentified shadow, or was Umera alive, waving for help, only to be swallowed by the mountain days later? Before 1984, 44 people had died attempting to climb Denali. 23 of their bodies were never recovered. Naomi Umera became the 24th. His disappearance stunned Japan, where he was a national hero. News outlets followed the story for weeks. The government even considered sending a full-scale recovery team, but the mountain wouldn't cooperate. Storms returned. The search was called off. To this day, Naomi Umera's body has never been found, and what happened during those final hours on Denali remain unknown. On a summer evening in 1979, a plane vanished off the radar near Alaska's Kodiak Island. The 3 people on board were never found. No wreckage, no oil slick, no distress signal beyond a final radio transmission. Among the missing was Ian McIntosh, a former Royal Navy officer, acclaimed television writer, and suspected spy. His disappearance became one of the Cold War's most tantalizing mysteries. blurring the line between fiction and real-life espionage. Born in Inverness, Scotland in 1940, McIntosh served 18 years in the Royal Navy, rising to the rank of lieutenant commander. His service record was unusual. According to his brother Lowry, Ian would vanish for long periods, and when he returned, he wouldn't speak of where he'd been. In 1976, he was quietly awarded the Member of the Order of the British Empire. The reason remains classified to this day. After retiring from the military, McIntosh poured his energy into writing, but not just any stories. He created The Sandbaggers, a gritty, tightly wound British spy series that quickly gained a cult following. It was nothing like James Bond. There were no gadgets, no tuxedos, no explosions, just a bleak bureaucracy of real intelligence work, internal politics, moral ambiguity, and agents who died unceremoniously, often for nothing. It was so accurate that some viewers believed it had been based on real operations. Some even questioned whether McIntosh had permission to reveal what he knew. In July 1979, McIntosh and his girlfriend, Susan Insull, a BBC production assistant, were vacationing in Alaska with their friend Graham Barber, a British Airways pilot. They'd flown from London to Honolulu and then on to Anchorage, renting a Raleigh 235 single-engine plane for sightseeing. At 5:45 p.m. on July 7th, Barber radioed a mayday. They were experiencing oil pressure problems. 4 minutes later came the final message.
This will be our last transmission. We are 500 feet and about to go in.
The plane's last known location was over Shuyak Island at the northern tip of the Kodiak Archipelago. What followed was an exhaustive search. U.S. Coast Guard helicopters and C-130 aircraft scanned more than 75 square miles of ocean and coastline. The weather was clear, visibility was perfect, but not a single scrap of debris was ever found. The silence only fueled the rumors. Some speculated McIntosh had faked his death and defected to the Soviet Union. Others suggested he'd been, quote, disappeared by Western intelligence, either for what he knew or for what he was planning to reveal. British intelligence officers were reportedly seen at his London flat before the public even knew he was missing. His brother, when he asked a U.S. intelligence contact for help, was told to, quote,
stop asking questions.
The most haunting clue came in the form of a postcard McIntosh had sent to his parents shortly before the trip. It was signed not Love Ian, as usual, but Live Ian. A strange, possibly deliberate slip, or a final encrypted message from a man who trafficked in secrets. After his disappearance, The Sandbaggers continued for one more season, but its creator's absence was palpable. The series ended quietly, no resolution, just like McIntosh himself. Whether he died in a tragic accident or vanished in the shadows of international intelligence, no one can say. What's left is a man-shaped gap in the historical record, a spy novelist who may have become the very thing he once wrote about. Alaska's beauty hides a quiet brutality, one that swallows people whole. Some vanished in plain sight, some were silenced before they could speak, and some are still waiting to be named. These aren't just cold cases, they're reminders that in a place as vast and unforgiving as Alaska, the truth can disappear just as easily as the people.